welcome to our latest installment of Good Trouble. For those of you that have been following, we've named this series of interviews that we do at the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at San Jose State. Good Trouble, named after, of course, the term that was very well coined by U.S. Representative from District 5 in Georgia, John Lewis, the late John Lewis. And just to reiterate and to read his quote from when he was commemorating the Pettus Bridge March, he says, "Do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful, be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is a struggle of a lifetime. Never, ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble." And so today we have with us Warren Blumenfeld, sorry, who is someone who is recognized, I think, across the country and around the world as well for the work that he has been doing over a lifetime, really important work in the area of social justice education, and is actually one of the formative scholars at the creation of social justice education and the building, I think of his reputation as a real intellectual force, but also social action force across the country in higher education. There are very many people working in higher ed who have been influenced by your work, as well as the work of your colleagues coming out of the University of Massachusetts College of Education, that has been really influential in helping people understand liberatory theories, what liberation means in terms of theory, what socialization plays in terms of forming our ways in which we think about each other and think about our relationships with the world and other people. And so I'm really so overjoyed to have you. It's such an honor because I think of your work as being so formative in my graduate school education. When I encountered your work, as a graduate student, and not to make aspirations about age, but I entered graduate school at a much older age, and so I was not 20 years old when I encountered that. So I just want to say that. But some of your formative work, I think, at the time that it came out, was considered fairly radical. So, and you've been a pioneer in looking at LGBTQ issues very openly and publicly in terms of calling out homophobia, calling out, the tyranny of cisgender sort of policing, all of those things. You've done that as an activist, a scholar activist, as well as someone who's written about this and whose textbooks and readings have influenced many a generation of students. So Warren, would love to hear, tell us a little bit about your history of your work and how did you get interested and started in doing the type of work that you do?
I was a student at San Jose State University. I came there in my sophomore year. I also is a first generation working class student. I was the first person in my entire family to go to college. I took my first year at a community college in Los Angeles where my parents were living, Valley Community College, Los Angeles Valley Community College. And I didn't feel that I could grow there. It was right across the street from my high school. I I grew up gender variant and I was bullied all the time. In the 1950s, my parents took me to see a psychologist to try to make me to be heterosexual, the very conservative 50s. My father was bullied every day in his high school and middle school for being Jewish.
Mm.
So he was afraid that I would be bullied for my gender variance and my gender non-traditional expression.
Mm-hmm.
So they sent me to a psychologist at the age of 4 until I was 13 years old. Twice a week, I was taken out of my classroom, brought to the psychologist, and for the next 50 minutes, the psychologist, I didn't even know who he was. We called him the toy doctor because we made toys there. And he tried to have me be more gender traditional. So, he had me build model airplanes and boats and trucks and things that boys are supposed to play with. He told my parents make sure he doesn't wash or dry the dishes. I mean, this was a very conservative time in American history when a brash senator from Wisconsin got up on the floor of the US Senate and loudly proclaimed, quote, communists, which was seen as Jews in the public imagination, corrupt the minds, and homosexuals corrupt the bodies of good upstanding Americans. This was a very conservative time, a time of extreme backlash. So my parents, I think they were well-intentioned. They did it for the right reasons, but the wrong way. So they try to have me conform to this image of what masculinity is. And my sister, in many ways, didn't respond traditionally either. She loved to play baseball and whatever, but it was okay in many ways to be a tomboy, but never a sissy. Yeah. There's a very different thing. So I grew up in ways that I learned to have shame. I internalized my own heterosexism and cissexism. And I also, my grandparents lived with us, and my grandfather on my mother's side is a survivor of the Holocaust, and he lost 9 of his brothers and sisters to Hitler. And I was named after his father, Wolf Mahler. So I grew up, and also when I was born, my mother's friend gave me, it's called a chay. It's a letter in Hebrew that stands for God. And when I was born, my mother kept it for me. And when I was 14, she said, okay, you can wear this now, but always wear it underneath your shirt. I said, why wear it underneath? So it's a symbol of God, but people will hurt you if they see it. That was her experience living in New York and in Los Angeles in the 1920s and 30s. So I grew up with this double sense of being different, being gender diverse, and being Jewish. So at a very early age, I got the concept of what the other was, what difference was. And also I saw, growing up in the 1950s, even in the early television, you saw the fire hoses, you saw the demonstrations in the South about what happened to African Americans. So I always had some kind of an affinity to the other, because I was the other in multiple ways. So I made interconnections at a very early age. And growing up and then finally moving away from home. So I came to San Jose State in 1966. I graduated in 1969, 2 weeks before the Stonewall riots.
Wow.
I went another year to get my secondary teaching certification at San Jose State, because in California, I don't know still, but at the time you had to go 5 years to get your certification. So I went the 5th year, and I left San Jose in early 1971. So my formative political training occurred in San Jose, and those were the most exciting and terrifying years of my life in many ways. There was a lot of movement and activity in the Bay Area. I basically identified with the Black Panthers in Oakland. I was a member of the Students Democratic Society, SDS, and we brought one of the Panthers down to give a talk. And at the time, the chancellor, the board of trustees wouldn't allow a Black Panther to talk at San Jose State. So we met right off campus, and he gave his talk at San Jose State. This was the time that Governor Ronald Reagan and his henchman, Glenn Dumke, who was the chancellor of Glenn Dumke was his education secretary, the chancellor of the California State University system, wouldn't allow those of us who wanted to form a gay liberation chapter on campus, wouldn't allow us to do it. So we met at a little diner on San Fernando Street. We weren't allowed because until 1976, homosexuality, the expression, was illegal in California. So they used the justification that we're not going to allow these people to engage in illegal homosexual behavior. Therefore, we're justified to not allow them on our campus. And he gave the reasons, for this, this justification, and this was throughout the entire. It was called California State College at the time. I don't know exactly the year that it changed its definition, but finally, after I graduated, Sacramento State took this all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled in their favor that they are indeed entitled to be a bona fide group on campus as any other group on campus is. So the Sacramento students finally took it to court, and it went to the Supreme Court in California.
I
I think that was around 1971.
have never heard that. That's an incredible landmark case. It's really important.
Yeah, I've written about it, so I'll send you some of that.
Sure.
But we met at a little diner off campus, and there were not a lot of us, but we had our first Pride March down First Street. That banner behind me is what one of the women in our group did silk. You put ink on silk, and then you pull the thing across. Silk screening.
Yeah.
Silk screening, right. So that's a silk screen. On the back, it's blue and orange or whatever.
So that's from the March on First Street at San Jose State back in
July 1971.
Wow.
There were 28 of us walking down First Street and getting rocks and garbage thrown at us by passersby, but we were loud and we were proud. And then we went on the campus with our banners. And that was before we were allowed to be an official group on campus. And those were very historic times. We had lots of demonstrations against the Vietnam War. Governor Reagan closed down the campus and placed National Guards to prevent us from demonstrating on campus. I often went to Berkeley I had a lot of friends at UC Berkeley. We had demonstrations there. Many times I would go to Santa Rita prison to bail them out. Those were frightening times because we had friends coming home in body bags in the Vietnam War. We had police then as now killing Black people all the time. And the Panthers, to me, was an image of liberation.
Yeah.
A community, they were doing wonderful things for the community, and they were speaking up against various forms of discrimination. And to me, they were one of my role models.
Yeah, I would say the same in my household. So I grew up here in the East Bay.
Yeah.
And my father at that time worked in a butcher shop in Oakland, and some of the Black Panthers and their families and friends would shop there. And on occasion, he and the other butchers would let some of the Black Panthers hide in their walk-in freezer and refrigerator to avoid being seen by the police if they came through the store or came through other places and stuff. And it was a time, I think, in my neighborhood where people were feeling that the work that they were doing, the Black Panthers were doing, were really important, bringing up really important issues. And the free school lunch things that they were doing in Oakland, all those things were really important. So
and
Yeah.
Black entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
But of course, with J. Edgar Hoover at the head of the FBI, they were basically on a watch list constantly.
Hmm. Hmm. So your time at San Jose State was, as you said,
Oh,
very formative for you as a young person. And and we are living in times where, of course, student
yes,
activism is still very, very vibrant, even during COVID, right?
right,
On our campus. And so it's a legacy that it's really wonderful to hear about your legacy here and the important work that you did. Although I'm sure it was at a great emotional cost and a great cost to your own safety and concern and worry about your friends and about you
right.
and other people. So
And I was coming out,
yeah.
in 66, 67. I mean, I knew I was gay, you know, probably since the age of 7 or whatever. But it gave me the space and the safety
Mhm,
to deal with issues of my sexuality.
mhm,
Um, I um, went to see a therapist in it was called Building K then. It
mhm,
was the counseling center.
mhm,
And I saw this therapist for about 2 years, and he was really helping me come to feel comfortable in who I am, who I
mhm,
was, who I
mhm,
am. Um, and then I saw it for about 2 years, and then one day we had a session, and it went well. And then I said, "See you next week," and I left. And then I hear this someone calling my voice behind me, and I turned around. It's my therapist who ran out of Building K, and he came up to me and said, "Warren, I'm really proud of you." And then he shook my hand. Said, "Okay, that was nice." The next day, he killed himself.
oh my gosh.
He was going through a very messy divorce. The person that I, you know, trusted with my emotions and my feelings killed himself.
Mm,
So when I heard about it, I went to Building K and said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Well, unfortunately, your therapist committed suicide." I was totally devastated.
mm,
They luckily hired an out and proud lesbian to take his place, and I started seeing her, um, and it was just a wonderful experience. And I remember being in a therapy group, people from all issues. And there was this one young woman in the group who said, "Warren, you're such a wonderful person. There's so many women who would just love to be with you." And my therapist said, "And there's a lot of men who'd like to be with him too." I said, "Yeah, that's right." Yes, Wigsy Syvertson, you might have heard of her.
I know her actually.
Oh,
Yeah,
she,
yeah.
I love Wigsy.
Oh my gosh.
She's,
Wow.
yeah, she's my,
Shout out to Wigsy.
yeah, John Lewis and Wigsy Syverson are my heroes.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. So you
Yes,
were here when she started. You were
yeah, yes. She was
yeah.
hired
She's
to
since
fill
retired.
in for the
Really well,
therapist that killed himself.
yeah, yeah. She's still well connected with the campus, and she's retired. But yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. 6 degrees of separation, right? So that's really wonderful.
Yes, exactly,
Great, great,
exactly.
great. Well, thank you so much for sharing your early history. I mean, I think we can see clearly, how you developed and how important it is. I think for you, or important it was for you in terms of your identity and being able to process and talk about it and to really work with other people so that people could build community and an ability to feel like they were not the other, right? But even though you're still constantly othered, I'm sure. But that's so important. And so I know that in a lot of your work, so I'm going to move forward a little bit. In a lot of your work in social justice education, you I think your work has inspired a lot of people to think about how important it is to understand intellectually, right? What you think might be going on in the dynamics as you are working in activism or trying to create change or trying to sustain change. So can you share with the audience who may not be familiar with your work, what are how do you think of how um, socialization works? How does that play in how we understand equity and talk about privilege and talk about how what are the productive ways that you have found? And sometimes they're not necessarily the nice, smooth ways, but what are the productive ways to really challenge and articulate some of these things that people should be rethinking, right, in terms of how they view difference or how they view othering?
One of the problems I'm seeing in the education system of the United States is the way he teaches or doesn't teach history.
Hmm.
That we need to understand the true history, that we no longer can teach Columbus as discovering the new world.
Hmm.
We can no longer see the quote unquote founding fathers of this country being these idealized, basically Greek gods.
Hmm.
Um, um, so some of the real history is coming out. One of the TED Talks that I give to all my social justice education classes is a TED Talk that talks about James Madison, who basically helped to create the Bill of Rights. And he was a forward-thinking thinker who was also a slaver. And
Hmm.
it symbolically and literally, his house was built from bricks. The foundation of his own home was built with bricks that you can see this on the surface of it, these little handprints of the enslaved children who built the bricks, which was the foundation for his own home. And this, in many ways, symbolically represents the founding of what we know today as the United States.
Hmm.
And you were talking about the 3/5 clause in the Constitution that considers enslaved Africans as 3/5 of a human being for census purposes, even though they could not vote. They were counted as 3/5 of a human being.
Hmm.
And we need to look at the way that we are socialized. We're still socialized with the myth that if you work hard and that you have good ambition, the whole notion that the United States is meritocratic, that you will succeed no matter where you come from and where your background is. This is the socialization that we are given after we're given the bottle.
Hmm.
This is the formula, the pablum that we are given, and people internalize this and believe it and blame those who don't make it. And many people uh, um, cannot be on a level playing field because of their othered identities,
Hmm.
because of their minoritized identities,
Hmm.
whether that be um, a person of color, whether that be a non dominant religion, a non dominant Protestant religion, a non dominant sexuality or gender identity and expression, non non-dominant abilities, etc. Non-language, English language as first language.
Hmm.
There's a lot of things that I talk about this schemata of some people are born on the top of a hill with frontline skates, and to them the goal and success, they just have to hang on and go downhill. Some people are born more of a level playing field, but a lot of people are given frontline skates to go up a hill. That to me is basically um, making visible the myth of meritocracy,
Hmm.
and socialization is based around this myth. So of course, many of us are mis-socialized.
Mhm.
And if we can't make it, we internalize our own oppression, saying that in some ways we start to believe the dominant discourse that there is indeed something wrong with us.
Mhm.
And I'm seeing this a lot within the LGBTQ community,
Mhm.
um, and, and especially how religion adds to this.
Yeah.
Religion can be a personal connection and communication with a power greater than ourselves. It could have healing, it could have very connective spiritual um, possibilities. But unfortunately, the way that many mainline religions use it as a hammer, as as a uh, a hammer pounding onto the individual, a form of fear, a form of hatred, a form of intolerance and hatred of the other.
Mhm.
How many wars have been instituted by primarily white men in the name of their God against another God? Somebody told me once, and I don't believe this is actually true, but it makes a point. More people have been killed in wars than all people who have died of all diseases combined. That's probably not accurate, but it makes a point. How many times do we kill people in the name of our God versus their false gods?
Mhm.
And in many ways, and I hate to say this, I really do, that many religions are maintaining the oppression of minoritized peoples.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
And religions need to be challenged, especially for their bigoted stance. And they are given tax deductions and they are given exemptions from federal, state, and local anti-discrimination laws in the name of religion.
Mhm. Mhm.
I can
Mhm.
go on about religion forever.
No, no, I appreciate the critique because, I think when we think of intersectionality, we often exclude religion, right? When we're especially in academia, when we're talking about that as a topic that people are uncomfortable critiquing or talking about. So yeah.
This isn't a shameless plug, but I just
No, go ahead.
one of my books is called Investigating Christian Privilege and Religious Oppression in the United States. And one of the forms of privilege that we need to talk more about is Christian privilege.
Mhm. Mhm.
We thank goodness because of Peggy McIntosh in 1988 writing that groundbreaking essay on white and male privilege. We're talking more about white privilege. We're
Mhm.
talking about male privilege.
Mhm.
We're not talking a lot about heterosexual and cisgender privilege. We're not talking a lot about Christian privilege.
Yeah,
We're not talking about able-bodied privilege.
yeah.
We're not talking about native US first English first language privilege.
Mhm.
Um, there's a lot of different intersectionalities of privilege that we have to talk about in order to make them seem visible
Yeah,
uh, to people.
yeah, as well as settler
Oh,
privilege.
settler colonialism, of course.
Communism. Yep, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, appreciate that. So we're talking about quite a breadth of systemic inequities, and so I'm going to just talk to you. I don't think I need to say much when we're talking about April 2021. We are on the other side of the Chauvin trial verdict. We have had numerous killings since then of extrajudicial killings of Black and Brown people, men mostly, in police interactions. We've also had, mass killings, AAPI, anti-AAPI hate in terms of, the targeting of Asians and people that who people feel are responsible for the coronavirus. All of these things are going on, and certainly in the years leading up to the current time, there have been other, many other types of issues, including anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim. It just seems like it goes on and on and on. And there's I think across the country there are people that are talk about diversity fatigue, right, or equity fatigue. Oh,
Sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. We are, I think this is very common in Zoom world these days. So to have
I
our,
fed him hoping he'd be quiet for an hour, but no.
yeah. Yeah, well, it's wonderful to see him. Yeah, so can you talk a little bit about, there's like backlash issues, there's also people that are just getting tired, there's like fatigue, right? People are just I'm so fatigued, I'm so tired, I can't even turn on the television, or every time I come out at the end of the day and look at my phone, it's blowing up, and how much more can we take? And so I think for a lot of people, you know there's a collective experience, but there's also different levels, I think, of engagement with the issues, because people are tired, but also people are fearful and people are frustrated. So can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing, any sort of guiding sort of principles you can talk about, as well as what are your observations and what are your feelings about the times that we're in?
Um, I'm a, uh, I teach at University of Massachusetts at Amherst now, and I got my doctorate at age 54.
Ah.
Um, was a member of the Gay Liberation Front in the 70s,
Hmm.
the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power in the late 70s, early 80s. So I've been a member of a lot of movements. I came into academia through activism,
Mhm.
and I realized that I published 5 books before I got my doctorate, and I couldn't teach them on a university campus because I didn't have my doctorate degree. The whole credentialing
Yep.
of the United States. So I'm seeing my students um, burning out. Every week I get at least one letter from the counseling center that said, your student has been hospitalized for severe depression.
Mm.
We're um, of all social identities, this has been a very trying time
Mhm.
for all of us in the entire world, not just in this country.
Yeah.
And I hope, in many ways, we're all suffering from a form of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Mhm.
And the last 4 years, the PTSD that I noticed was post-Trump stress disorder. That we didn't have leadership at the top, and because of that, the fringes became the center. The neo-Nazi um, fascism from the fringes became central in the discourse, and we've seen a lot of the problems that imposed. I'm a follower of what's called the abolition movement,
Mhm.
the new abolition movement,
Mhm.
that said our problems right now are not capable of getting better through mere reform. We really need to abolish the institutions, some of the institutions as they currently exist, most notably policing and prisons. We must abolish them and start over with a different foundation.
Mm.
And I agree with that. I don't believe that, it's great that Chauvin was convicted on all 3 counts, and there was a certain amount of reparations through justice for his family. I'm not just talking about monetary, but justice is a form of reparation itself. But Chauvin is not the problem. He's a symptom of the problem. And the problem is systemic racism
Mhm.
and implicit bias. And this cannot be cured by having a few trainings for the police officers. I don't even know if it could be cured that the Attorney General of the United States is investigating the Minneapolis and the Louisville, Kentucky police departments. I think we really have to have a different form.
Mhm.
And that form could be something as you abolish policing as it is, and you have a safety council commission, that police are trained better in a certain way, but also only brought into the scene under specific, limited, defined terms.
Mhm.
If someone is injuring themselves or others. Other times you need to send in social workers, you need to send in conflict resolution specialists, you need to send in psychologists, you need to send in having mediators for domestic disputes. Police should not be doing all of that. And you need to raise the standards for entrance into the police departments as well. Because we know within the last few decades that radical right-wing extremists have infiltrated the very department of people who are supposed to defend the people in their communities, but actually are there to instigate racial violence. So, and the same with police. The policing in many ways is a system of unregulated slavery. These are called corrections departments. They don't correct. They make the situation where we have to get rid of private for-profit prison systems, and we really need to reevaluate what are the purposes of prisons. Why the United States, I don't know if this statistic is exactly right, 4.2% of the world's population, with 25% of incarcerated people within the entire world. Something is wrong. My next book coming out this summer, it's called God, Guns, Capitalism, and Hypermasculinity, commentaries on the firearms culture of the United States. We really need to have a way to bring the legislators together, and it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. We don't have any more mental illness that causes violence in our country than in any other country, but we have the deaths because of the ready availability of the guns. So we really need to reevaluate our institutions, those institutions that just aren't working. We have to abolish them and start over. And I think this is something that hopefully will gain more momentum in the next few years, and especially around climate change. I mean, you know, we could talk for hours about the damage that our country and other countries, but again, with 4.2% of the population, we have an exorbitant amount of pollutants that we're putting into the environment for such a small minority population of the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I appreciate that. I'm going to switch gears a little as we're heading towards the end of this interview. And if you don't mind, I'd like to talk about one of your colleagues that we just lost recently, a giant, I think, in social justice education, Maurianne Adams. And was just wondering, you know, can you talk a little bit about her legacy and what she has meant to you in your work? And I'm sorry to, you know, to bring up something that must be very difficult to talk about, but she was someone that's beloved, I think, by people who haven't even met her because of her critical work. I think that has been so transformative for many people.
Maurianne was one of my mentors, and she was on my dissertation committee. Some of the courses that I took at University of Massachusetts at Amherst, what I gained the most were in her courses. She was brilliant. She was articulate. She was forward thinking. She was the one who really helped to establish social justice as a discipline. So her work is far-reaching and phenomenal. She was a groundbreaker. She was a pioneer. She was a critical thinker who saw critical thinking as our way out of this mess. She and I both critiqued how education has gone from its original, what I learned at San Jose State. I was in my ed psych course, and I remember the first day my professor talked about the derivation of the word to educate. It's from two Latin words, educere. E means, it's Latin for out of or from, and ducere means to guide or to lead.
Mm.
And to educere, to educate, means to guide or lead from the student's knowledge, as opposed to Freire's terms of the banking system of education, to deposit into the docile waiting mind.
Mhm.
Maurianne Adams was very, very concerned that education get back to its roots,
Mm.
being student-centered, being transformational,
Mhm.
helping to lead or guide the students to, or take out of the students what they know, to bring them to a higher place. So she was a pedagogue's pedagogue, or whatever. I learned a lot from her, and she said to me, Warren, you taught me a lot too. It was great. Both of our major backgrounds was anti-Semitism.
Mm.
She's written a lot about anti-Semitism, and I've written quite a bit, and I've gone back to Poland 8 times now to do genealogy work and Holocaust research.
Mm.
And we would always talk about our understanding of the Holocaust, understanding about the long history of anti-Semitism, and how, in many ways, anti-Semitism and all the forms of oppression link. We
Mm.
talk about the oppression wheel, that
Mhm.
each of the spokes on the wheel are a different form of oppression, but I've kind of conceptualized that what is holding the wheel together at the rim is a cross current and cross connection between patriarchy and white supremacy. That's the link of all the different forms of oppression.
Mm.
And Maurianne and I would have long conversations in class and into the night.
Mm.
It's like one day I said, in this class, we're way up here, and it's like I'm feeling stoned and I didn't smoke anything. We're always on these levels of just going into theory and going into application and going into practice and
Mm.
praxis.
Mhm.
That she was just remarkable, and how she got students to think at such higher and interconnected levels. And she is dearly, dearly missed. We're
Mm.
going to be putting on a forum, a symposium next, I think, in the fall, at the College of Education at UMass,
Mm.
talking about the works of Maurianne Adams, bringing in her family, and having testimonials of some of her former students, people who never met her, who have read her works,
Mm.
and how they have taken her works
Mhm.
and transposed it into various fields. Because one of the great things that Maurianne had was being able to have people see how social justice is applicable for every discipline,
It is.
from science, history, technology, mathematics,
Mhm.
um, literature, because she has her doctorate in English.
I did not know that.
She taught English at Smith College.
Mm.
Yes, and she came and basically developed the social justice education program,
Mhm.
along with people like Pat Griffin, um, and Bailey Jackson
Mhm.
at UMass. And because of their work, and because of 2 of their books, one of them I co-edited, Diversity,
Yep.
Readings for Diversity and Social Justice.
Very widely read book. Yeah.
And the companion is Teaching for Diversity and Social Justice.
Widely
And
read.
that's now coming out soon in the 4th edition.
Wow.
And people around the world are using both of these books in order to understand how do you create curricula, how do you create workshops, and what are some of the basic readings that you can use at these workshops. So both of these books together have really been dynamic, pioneering, and changing the ways that education is being looked at and taught. So thank you, Morianne. I love you. May your memory be a blessing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Thank you. And I would like to thank you at this point for this fabulous and really engaging interview. I think that many of our students and faculty and staff will find your story very inspiring. Love the Spartan connection you have to San Jose State University and the formative way in which it shaped your life. It's really very inspiring, and to hear about your stories of of the courage and the fierceness it takes, right, to speak up even when the cost might be very high. And so really appreciate your sharing that part of your personal story. It'll mean a lot, I think, to many of our student activists on campus, and as well as to a lot of our employees who also are out there trying to really work on systemic change. So just
Someone asked me,
yeah.
said, Warren, you're 77 and you've been doing this work, since high school. How do you stay involved?
Yeah. How do you want to answer that?
Yeah, and someone said to me once, the definition of burnout is having unrealistic expectations. If you think you're going to make all of these isms, racism, sexism, classism, ableism, um, wasms overnight, that won't happen. You have to understand and have realistic expectations. And I held that to heart, and it has sustained me. And one last thing, the last time I was at San Jose State was the day after Trump was elected. I was going to a conference in San Francisco 2 or 3 days after that. And I said, I want to go back to San Jose because I hadn't been there for many years. And my heart is still in San Jose. Some
Wow.
people, their heart is in San Francisco. My heart's in San Jose.
Oh,
And that some of it looked the same, but it's like, what? My dormitory was torn down. Markham Hall is now this high rise, and I met with some of the students in the LGBT group, and I told them that I was one of the first
oh,
members of the group, way back when. And they said, come tonight. We're having a rally at the statues. And I said, which statues? And she said, oh, the Tommy Smith and the John Carlos statues. I said, they were my classmates. I
wow.
was in the same class as them. I in '68, I was watching,
Yeah.
with,
Yeah.
and they're my classmates, and they had a hero's welcome when they came back, and now they have a statue. And I went there, and I was like, oh wow, yes,
Mm.
this was beautiful. And that night, about maybe 1,000 students came and talked about their feelings about Trump's election and their commitments to making change.
Do you know I facilitated that dialogue at the state?
Yes, I knew I heard your name. I was there. I was there. Yes,
There.
I was there.
Ah,
Yes, I knew I had heard your name. Yes, and you put us into small groups
yes, it's
at,
intergroup
at
dialogue.
night. Yes, I was there.
Oh my
Yes,
God. You
I
were
said,
there.
San Jose has come a long way to have your position. Oh, I love that. Yes,
Oh
thanks.
my gosh, I cannot believe that you were there. That was
Yes.
a moment, wasn't it? There was a big,
I
big,
got chills. And
yeah.
I also said, yeah, Warren, you're 73 and your generation is not going to be here much longer, but we have passed the torch.
Yeah.
Your students
I'm gonna
and
cry.
to the younger generation, they are going to continue the fight and the struggle, and it is getting better and it will get even better. And I am hopeful. thank you for the great work that you are doing.
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna cry. I can't believe that you were there. What a
Yes,
moment. This
yes,
interview was meant to be.
yes.
Oh
And
my
you facilitated it so beautifully.
God.
1,000 students, and you held their attention, and you got work done, and people, you gave people voice. It was brilliant, brilliant. You got to get a raise.
Pass it on.
Yes, yes.
No, I feel ambushed by emotion and also by that revealing news that you were there at that moment, because that is a moment I will never forget. I can still
Me
picture it,
neither.
feel it.
Yeah.
It was a, yeah, a bittersweet moment of beauty as well as just intense grief and pain. It was a one of those moments that will long be in my memory, and it's really moving to me to know that you were there,
Yeah.
and how wonderful to be there as an alumni after so many years and all the work that you have done. Wow.
San Jose, those 4 years there were the best and the most difficult years of my life. I will cherish San Jose until I die.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much. I wish we had more time to unpack your classmates, because I also realize that I know from some of the oral histories that many of the Black athletes were limited to certain majors,
Yeah,
and weren't allowed to take majors in other disciplines. So I imagine you were in one of those majors to be in those classes with those
I was
students.
in sociology.
Sociology was one of them. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I was in sociology, and
Yeah.
Harry Edwards was one of my professors.
Oh my gosh. Harry
Yes.
Edwards is a hero on our campus.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I took his sociology of youth course.
Wow. Wow. Well, the
Yes.
next time I see Harry Edwards, I will have to talk to him about our interview and
Right. I'm sure he doesn't know me, but
no,
there were
but I
about
but
200
he
students in the class at the time. But
yeah, but he'll be very touched that you
yeah.
that you cite, your experience of
Oh,
being.
yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you so much.
Oh my
I
god, what a gift this interview has been.
And
Thank
this has been an honor for me.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much.